I am Allison Mitchell, 27, and last Christmas I discovered my entire life was built on lies. After dropping out of college to work 2 jobs, I finally returned home for the holidays. My hands trembled as I knocked on my parents' door, dreading the questions about my unfinished degree. Little did I know, Grandma Eleanor was about to drop a bombshell that would shatter our family forever. The truth was hidden in plain sight all along. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. And if you have ever discovered a shocking family secret, hit that like and subscribe button if you want to find out what my grandmother said that changed everything. Growing up in our middle-class neighborhood in suburban Boston, my childhood seemed perfectly normal. Our 2-story colonial with the white picket fence fit right in with the American dream my parents had carefully crafted. My father, Robert, an accountant at a respectable firm, and my mother, Margaret, a part-time real estate agent, were pillars of our community. They attended every PTA meeting, hosted neighborhood barbecues, and made sure my younger brother, Kevin, and I had everything we needed. Education was the Mitchell family religion. From kindergarten, my parents drilled into us that college wasn't optional but mandatory. Good grades were expected, not celebrated. My father would review our report cards with the same scrutiny he gave tax returns. B grades earned concerned talks about applying ourselves, while A's were simply acknowledged with a nod. My grandmother Eleanor, my father's mother, reinforced this mentality. A retired high school principal with silver hair, always pulled into a perfect bun. Grandma Eleanor had a warmth to her that balanced my parents' pressure. She lived 30 minutes away in a quaint house filled with books and the smell of cinnamon. During weekend visits, she would quiz us on history and mathematics while baking cookies, somehow making learning feel like a treat rather than a chore. Education is the one thing nobody can ever take from you, she would say, gently tapping my nose with a flour-covered finger. Mitchell women have always been smart as whips. You come from a long line of educated women, Allison. When I received my acceptance letter to Boston University, my parents threw a party. They invited the neighbors, colleagues, even my high school teachers. My father made a toast about how proud he was, how I was the first Mitchell to attend such a prestigious university. I remember the pride swelling in my chest as everyone applauded. The fairy tale began to unravel during my sophomore year. The tuition bills kept coming, and my parents assured me they had it under control. We have a college fund, my father would say whenever I expressed concern about the mounting costs. Just focus on your studies. But I noticed changes at home. My mother stopped getting her hair done at her usual salon. My father started bringing lunches from home instead of eating out. The annual family vacation to Cape Cod was canceled. Still, they insisted everything was fine. Then came the phone call that changed everything. My mother sobbing on the other end of the line, telling me my father had been hospitalized with chest pains. The doctors called it stress-induced, not a heart attack, but it was enough to shake me to my core. During my visit to the hospital, I overheard my parents arguing about money in hushed, urgent tones. Words like credit card debt and second mortgage filtered through the thin curtain. That night, I made a decision that seemed both impulsive and completely necessary. I would drop out and get a job to help support my family. My parents were horrified when I told them. They insisted I continue my education, that they would figure things out. But I had made up my mind. I packed my dorm room and moved into a tiny studio apartment with peeling wallpaper and a bathtub in the kitchen. The next 2 years were a blur of exhaustion. I worked as a barista at a local coffee shop from 5 a.m. to 1 p.m., then bartended at a downtown pub from 6 p.m. until closing. My hands were constantly chapped from dish soap and coffee grounds. I learned to sleep in 4-hour bursts and survive on staff meals. The hardest part wasn't the work or the exhaustion. It was the shame. I stopped calling home regularly, making excuses to miss family gatherings. I created elaborate lies about classes and internships, unable to admit that the Mitchell family success story had hit a dead end with me. My brother Kevin, meanwhile, followed the script perfectly. He attended a state school on a partial scholarship, studying business like our father. During our increasingly rare phone conversations, he would talk about his internships and networking events while I counted tips in my head. As Christmas approached this year, the excuses I had relied on for holiday absences felt thin. My mother called daily, her voice a mixture of pleading and guilt-tripping. "Your grandmother is getting older, Allison. She asks about you every time I see her." Finally, I agreed to come home for Christmas dinner. I requested the evening shift off at the bar, telling myself I could still make the morning shift the next day if I left by midnight. The drive to my parents' house gave me 3 hours to rehearse my answers to the inevitable questions about school and career prospects. What I didn't anticipate was discovering the truth about what my family had been hiding all this time. As I pulled into the familiar driveway, snow crunching beneath my tires, I had no idea that by dessert, everything I thought I knew about my family would be turned upside down. The Christmas lights twinkled along the roofline of my childhood home, casting a multicolored glow across the snow-covered lawn. The wreath on the front door was the same one my mother had been putting up for 15 years, slightly lopsided with a red bough that had seen better days. I sat in my car for a few extra minutes, rehearsing my smiles and prepared answers one last time. When I finally knocked, it was my father who answered, his face lighting up with genuine surprise and happiness that made my stomach twist with guilt. "Allison, you made it." He pulled me into a hug that smelled like pine and the cologne he had worn since I was a child. When he pulled back, I noticed new lines around his eyes, a slight stoop to his shoulders that hadn't been there before. "Hi, Dad," I managed, stepping into the warm house. "Sorry, I'm a little late. The roads were bad." My mother appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked thinner than I remembered, her holiday sweater hanging a bit loose around the shoulders. "Allison, sweetheart." She embraced me tightly, then held me at arm's length to examine me. "You look tired. Are you getting enough sleep with all your studying?" The lie came automatically. "Finals were rough this semester, but I think I did well." The words felt sour on my tongue. As my mother took my coat, I noticed her and my father exchanging an odd glance. There was something nervous in their interaction, a tension that seemed out of place for a holiday reunion. "Kevin's already here," my mother said, leading me toward the living room. "And a few of the cousins. Your grandmother should arrive any minute." My brother Kevin rose from the couch when I entered, looking every bit the successful young professional in his sweater vest and pressed slacks. At 24, he had already secured a job at a marketing firm that would begin after graduation in the spring. "The prodigal sister returns," he joked, giving me a side hug. "How's life in academia treating you?" "You know how it is," I said vaguely. "Always another paper to write." My cousins Jennifer and Michael offered polite greetings, their children playing with new toys in the corner. Small talk about the weather and holiday traffic filled the awkward spaces as I sipped the eggnog my father pressed into my hand. The doorbell rang, announcing Grandma Eleanor's arrival. My father rushed to answer it with unusual eagerness, as if grateful for the interruption. My grandmother entered like royalty, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the snow, her posture as straight as ever. She carried a large bag of precisely wrapped gifts and a covered dish that she immediately instructed my father to take to the kitchen. "Allison," she said when she spotted me, her eyes brightening. "Finally decided to grace us with your presence, I see." Despite her words, she embraced me warmly, smelling of Chanel No. 5 and peppermint. When she pulled back, her shrewd eyes assessed me in a way that made me feel she could see through every lie I had constructed. "You look thin," she declared. "They must be working you too hard at that university." "I'm fine, Grandma," I assured her. "Just busy." As the family gathered in the living room, I excused myself to use the bathroom, needing a moment alone to steady my nerves. On my way down the hall, I passed my father's home office, the door uncharacteristically ajar. A stack of papers on his desk caught my eye, and I paused, glancing over my shoulder to make sure no one was watching. I slipped into the office, telling myself I just needed a moment of quiet. But curiosity pulled me toward the desk, where several official-looking documents lay scattered. My heart nearly stopped when I saw my name at the top of a bank statement. Below it, a series of withdrawals labeled student loan payment, A. Mitchell. Confusion washed over me as I stared at the paper. I hadn't taken out any student loans. My parents had always insisted they were covering my tuition from their savings and my college fund. Yet here was evidence of regular payments for loans in my name. Next to the statement was a letter from Mitchell Family Trust, addressed to my father. I had never heard of such a trust. As I reached for it, I heard footsteps approaching in the hallway. "Allison?" My mother's voice called. "Dinner's ready, honey. Everyone's waiting." I quickly stepped away from the desk, my mind racing with questions. "Coming," I called back, my voice surprisingly steady despite the thundering of my heart. As I followed my mother to the dining room, the festive table setting with its china plates and crystal glasses seemed suddenly like props on a stage, part of a performance I hadn't realized we were all participating in. The traditional Christmas ham sat at the center of the table, surrounded by all the familiar side dishes of my childhood. My father stood at the head of the table, carving knife in hand, while Grandma Eleanor sat at the opposite end, regal in her holiday best. The normalcy of the scene only heightened my sense of disorientation. Finally, Kevin joked as I took my seat. I was about to start gnawing on the tablecloth. As my father served the food, the conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. I smiled and nodded at appropriate intervals. But my mind kept returning to those documents in the office. What loans were being paid off in my name? Why had I never known about a family trust? I noticed my parents exchanging more of those strange glances, and now grandmother seemed to be watching them with narrowed eyes. There was an undercurrent to this gathering that I couldn't quite grasp, like hearing a conversation through a wall. "So, Allison," my cousin Jennifer asked, passing the mashed potatoes, "will you be finishing your degree this spring?" Before I could formulate another lie, Grandma Eleanor leaned forward with interest. "Yes, do tell us about your studies, dear. Your father says you're doing remarkably well." I felt the weight of every eye at the table on me, particularly my parents. The lies I had rehearsed in the car suddenly seemed hollow and obvious. "Actually," I began, then faltered. What could I possibly say that wouldn't unravel everything? Little did I know, Grandma Eleanor was about to do the unraveling for me. The dining room glowed with the soft light of the antique chandelier overhead, casting a warm halo over the elaborate Christmas dinner spread before us. Steam rose from the glazed ham, surrounded by colorful side dishes in my mother's best-serving bowls. The good china, only used for special occasions, gleamed against the deep red tablecloth. It was a picture-perfect holiday scene, the kind my mother had always strived to create. "Kevin was just telling us about his job offer," my father said, smoothly redirecting the conversation away from my education. "Starting salary that would make any parent proud." My brother shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but couldn't quite hide his smile. "It's just entry-level, Dad. But the company has a great reputation." "Nonsense," my father insisted, raising his wine glass. "We should celebrate. My son, the future marketing executive." Glasses clinked around the table as everyone congratulated Kevin. I forced myself to smile and join the toast, ignoring the familiar pang of inadequacy that always accompanied these celebrations of my brother's achievements. "And what about you, Allison?" my grandmother asked, those keen eyes fixed on me. "Your father mentions your studies often, but never quite gets into the specifics." I pushed mashed potatoes around my plate, feeling my palms begin to sweat. "Oh, still plugging away. What classes are you taking this semester?" Kevin asked, and I couldn't tell if he was genuinely curious or if he sensed my discomfort and was digging deeper. "Research methods. Advanced statistics, some electives," I mumbled, naming courses I'd looked up on the university website before arriving. My grandmother took a sip of her wine, watching me over the rim of her glass. And how are you finding the balance between your studies and your social life? College can be so demanding. It's challenging, I admitted, clinging to the truth where I could find it. Sometimes I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water. Well, thank goodness your parents are taking care of the financial side, Grandma Eleanor said with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. Good thing your parents pay off your student loans. That's one less worry for you. The room seemed to freeze. My father's knife clattered against his plate. My mother suddenly became intensely interested in rearranging her napkin. What loans? I asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. I dropped out to work 2 jobs. The silence that followed was absolute. Even my young cousins sensed the tension. Their usual squirming and chattering halted as if someone had pressed pause on a video. My father cleared his throat. Allison, this isn't the time or place. What loans, Dad? I repeated, my voice stronger now. I've been working as a barista and bartender for 2 years, thinking I was helping our family finances. What student loans are being paid off in my name? My mother's face had gone pale. Robert, she whispered to my father. We should have told her. It's not what you think, my father said, his voice strained. Then what is it? I demanded, thinking of the documents I'd seen in his office. Because what I think is that there's money being withdrawn for student loans I never took out, for classes I haven't been attending. Grandma Eleanor's chair scraped back as she stood up, her small frame suddenly commanding the room. Her eyes, usually warm, had turned to steel as she looked at my father. Robert James Mitchell, she said, her voice quiet but cutting. Tell your daughter the truth, or I will. My father's face crumpled, years seeming to add themselves to his features in seconds. Mother, please, we can discuss this privately after dinner. No, Grandma Eleanor said firmly. No more secrets. No more lies. She turned to me, her expression softening slightly. Allison, when you were born, I established a trust fund for your education. A substantial one. Your grandfather and I believe deeply in providing for our grandchildren's futures. My mind raced to process this information. A trust fund? But then why did I need to drop out? Why did Dad end up in the hospital with stress when I was in college? Because, Grandma Eleanor said, her gaze hardening again as she looked at my parents, the money wasn't being used the way it was intended. Your parents have been withdrawing from your educational trust for years, claiming expenses related to your schooling. That's not entirely accurate, Mother, my father protested weakly. Isn't it? Grandmother challenged. Then perhaps you'd like to explain why I received a statement showing withdrawals for Allison's tuition when she just told us she hasn't been in school for 2 years. All eyes turned to my father, who seemed to shrink in his chair. My mother reached for his hand, tears starting to stream down her face. We meant to replace it, my mother whispered. It started small, just borrowing a little when business was slow or when the mortgage payment was tight. You stole from me, I asked, the words feeling strange in my mouth. From my future? We didn't think of it that way, my father said, desperation in his voice. We thought we were borrowing from the family pot. We always intended to pay it back. Kevin pushed his chair back from the table. Did you take from my trust too? His voice was sharp, accusatory. My father shook his head. No, Kevin. Your educational trust is intact. So just mine then, I said, a bitter laugh escaping me. Just the daughter's future was up for grabs. It wasn't like that, my mother insisted, wiping at her tears. We had some financial setbacks. Your father's company downsized, and we had to make choices. And you chose Kevin's education over mine, I stated flatly. It wasn't a question. Kevin looked stricken. I had no idea, Allison. You have to believe me. He was already further along, my father tried to explain. It made more sense to let him finish. We thought you could take a semester off, maybe transfer to a less expensive school when things improved. But they never improved, did they? Grandma Eleanor said. Instead, you kept withdrawing from Allison's trust while letting her believe the family was struggling so badly she needed to drop out and work 2 jobs. She shook her head in disgust. My own son. I pushed away from the table, unable to sit there any longer. I've been living in a studio apartment with a bathtub in the kitchen, I said, my voice shaking. I've been making coffee at 5 in the morning and serving drinks until 2 a.m. I've been skipping meals and buying clothes at thrift stores, all while you've been taking money that was meant for my education. Allison, please, my mother begged, rising from her chair. We can explain everything if you'll just listen. But I was already backing away from the table, from them, from the beautiful Christmas dinner that now seemed like nothing but an elaborate prop in a family of lies. I need some air, I managed to say, turning and walking as steadily as I could toward the front door. Behind me, I heard the argument erupting, my grandmother's voice raised in anger, my father's defensive replies, my mother's sobs. I grabbed my coat from the hook and stepped out into the cold December night, the snow crunching under my feet as I fled the only home I'd ever known, now feeling like the site of the greatest betrayal of my life. The bitter cold hit my face like a slap, a physical shock that matched the emotional one still reverberating through my body. Snowflakes swirled around me as I stumbled down the front steps, my breath forming clouds in the frigid air. I had no destination in mind, just an overwhelming need to put distance between myself and the dinner table where my life had just imploded. I made it as far as my car before the tears came, hot trails on my cold cheeks. I fumbled with the door handle, finally wrenching it open and collapsing into the driver's seat. The car was freezing, but I barely noticed, wrapping my arms around myself as sobs tore through my body. A trust fund. I had a trust fund for education that I never knew about. While I had been working myself to exhaustion, living on ramen and coffee, sleeping on a futon with springs that poked into my back, there had been money designated specifically for me. Money that my parents had been systematically taking. Through the fogged windows of my car, I could see the front door of the house open. Kevin stepped out, looking around frantically until he spotted my car. He jogged toward me, his breath visible in the cold air. I locked the doors. Allison. His voice was muffled through the glass. Please, let me in. It's freezing out here. Part of me wanted to start the engine and drive away, leaving all of them behind. But the practical part of me, the part that had learned to calculate tips to the penny and stretch $1 until it screamed, knew I couldn't afford a hotel. And the emotional part of me, despite everything, needed answers. I unlocked the passenger door. Kevin slid in quickly, bringing a rush of cold air with him. Thank you, he said, rubbing his hands together. I didn't grab my coat. What do you want? Kevin. My voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. He turned to look at me, his face a mixture of guilt and confusion. I swear to you, Allison, I had no idea. No idea they were taking from your trust, or that you had dropped out. I thought you were still at Boston University. How could you not know? I demanded. We're supposed to be close. Didn't you ever wonder why I stopped coming home? Why I always had an excuse not to meet up when you were in the city? Kevin ran a hand through his hair. A gesture so familiar it made my heart ache despite my anger. I thought you were just busy with school. You know how it is at the end of a semester. And then Mom and Dad always had updates about how well you were doing, so I never questioned it. They told you I was doing well. I laughed bitterly. While I was mixing drinks for handsy businessmen until 2 in the morning. I'm so sorry, he whispered. If I had known. You would have what? Given up your precious business degree? Told Mom and Dad to stop favoring you. The words came out harsher than I intended, years of resentment bubbling to the surface. Kevin flinched. That's not fair. I didn't ask to be favored. But you didn't question it either, did you? I shot back. It must have been nice, being the golden child. We sat in silence for a moment, the windows slowly fogging up around us. Finally, Kevin spoke again, his voice quiet. Grandma is still in there reading them the riot act. I've never seen her so angry. Good, I said. Though the thought of my grandmother's disappointment in her only son made me sad despite everything. There's more, Kevin said hesitantly. Things started coming out after you left. Dad's firm downsized 3 years ago, and he took a major pay cut but didn't tell anyone. He's been working as a bookkeeper at a small company, making half what he used to. I processed this information, trying to align it with the image of my proud father. And Mom? Kevin sighed. Mom apparently has a shopping addiction. Like a real problem. There are credit cards Dad didn't know about, store cards maxed out. When they started taking from your trust, it was supposed to be temporary. Just to cover some basic bills until Dad found a better job. But then it snowballed. That doesn't make it okay, I said, but some of the white-hot anger was beginning to cool. Making room for a more complicated emotion. No, it doesn't, Kevin agreed. Nothing makes it okay. But I thought you should know the whole story. A tap on my window made us both jump. Grandma Eleanor stood outside, wrapped in her coat, her face set in determined lines. I hesitated, then rolled down the window. May I join you? She asked. I believe we have much to discuss. Kevin opened his door. Take my spot, Grandma. I should go back inside and... He trailed off, clearly unsure what he could possibly do to help the situation. Your mother could use some support right now, Grandma said. Your father too, though heaven knows he deserves to stew in his own juices for a while. As Kevin trudged back to the house, Grandma Eleanor settled into the passenger seat with surprising agility for a woman in her 70s. She pulled the door shut firmly and turned to face me. First, she said, I want you to know that I had no idea what was happening. I set up those trusts when you and Kevin were born, with clear instructions about their use. I receive quarterly statements, but I admit I haven't been scrutinizing them as carefully as I should have. When I saw withdrawals for your tuition, I assumed they were legitimate. How did you find out the truth? I asked. I ran into Professor Winters at the grocery store last month, she explained. She asked how you were doing since leaving the university. When I told her you were still there, about to graduate, she looked confused. She said she hadn't seen you in 2 years, not since you withdrew. My heart sank. Dr. Winters had been my favorite professor, the one who'd encouraged me to pursue a degree in psychology. What did you do? I started asking questions, Grandma said grimly. Your parents gave evasive answers. I requested detailed statements from the trust. The picture became clearer, but I wasn't certain until tonight, when you confirmed you'd dropped out. She reached across the center console to take my cold hand in her warm one. Allison, there's still money in your trust. Not as much as there should be, but enough to make a difference. It's yours, and I'm removing your parents as trustees effective immediately. I stared at her, trying to process this information. How much? Approximately $70,000. She said. Your parents have withdrawn nearly twice that amount over the years. The number hit me like a physical blow. $140,000. With that kind of money, I could have completed my degree without working at all, could have gone on to graduate school, could have avoided 2 years of exhaustion and stress and shame. I don't understand how they could do this to me, I said, fresh tears welling up. I'm their daughter. Grandma Eleanor squeezed my hand. People do terrible things when they're desperate and afraid. It doesn't excuse it, but fear makes cowards of us all sometimes. I trusted them, I whispered. All this time. I thought I was helping the family by dropping out, by working instead of adding to their financial burden. And they let me believe that lie. Yes, Grandma said simply. They did. And they will have to live with that knowledge and with the consequences of their actions. Through the windshield, I could see my parents standing in the doorway of the house, watching us. My mother was crying, her face buried in her hands. My father stood straight-backed but defeated, looking every one of his 57 years. What happens now? I asked, not really expecting Grandma to have an answer. But she did. "Now, my dear," she said with determination, "we go back inside. We sit down like adults. And we begin the difficult work of deciding whether this family can be saved." The walk back to the house felt like marching toward a firing squad. Grandma Eleanor kept her arm linked with mine, her presence both comforting and strengthening. The Christmas lights that had seemed so welcoming just hours ago now felt like gaudy distractions from the broken family inside. My parents stepped back as we approached the door, creating a path for us to enter. The contrast between the cold night air and the warmth of the house made my cheeks tingle, a physical reminder of the threshold I was crossing. This wasn't just a return to the dinner table, it was a step into a new reality where nothing could be taken at face value. The dining room. "I think," Grandma Eleanor directed, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Kevin, would you join us, please?" My brother appeared from the kitchen, his expression solemn. The cousins and their children had apparently been sent home. The festive gathering disbanded in the wake of our family implosion. We arranged ourselves around the table like negotiators at a peace conference. The half-eaten holiday meal still lay scattered across the table, the food now cold and congealing, much like the atmosphere in the room. "I believe," Grandma Eleanor began, "that we need absolute honesty now. No more evasions, no more half-truths. Robert, Margaret, I think you owe your daughter a complete explanation." My father's hands trembled slightly as he folded them on the table. "Where do you want us to start?" "The beginning would be appropriate," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "When did you first start taking from my trust fund?" My father exchanged a glance with my mother, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "It started about 5 years ago," he admitted. "The economy was bad, and the firm I worked for was struggling. They cut my salary by 20%, then laid off a third of the staff. I was grateful to keep my job, even with the pay cut. We tried to adjust our lifestyle," my mother added, her voice barely above a whisper. "But we were already stretched thin with the mortgage and both of you in private high schools. So you took from my trust instead of moving to a less expensive house or transferring us to public school," I challenged. "We thought it would be temporary," my father insisted. "Just until things improved. We didn't want to disrupt your lives. Instead, you disrupted my entire future," I said coldly. My mother flinched. "We never meant for that to happen." The first withdrawal was small, just enough to cover a mortgage payment when we were short. We told ourselves we'd pay it back the next month. "But you didn't," Grandma Eleanor stated. "No," my father admitted. "Things got worse, not better. The firm continued to struggle. I was working 60-hour weeks for less pay, trying to prove my value so I wouldn't be the next one laid off. And my mother hesitated, then squared her shoulders. "I have a problem with spending. I've been using shopping to cope with stress for years." Robert knew about some of it, but not the extent. "You have a shopping addiction?" Kevin asked, clearly shocked. "But you're always so careful with money, always telling us to save and be frugal." "It's easier to preach than to practice," she said bitterly. "I would buy things, hide them, sometimes return them, sometimes not. The credit card bills kept growing. I kept telling myself I could stop anytime, that I just needed this one thing to feel better. When I finally discovered the full extent of the debt," my father continued, "we were in too deep. My credit score had tanked from late payments. We couldn't qualify for a consolidation loan. That's when you started stealing from me in earnest," I finished for him. "We were desperate," my mother pleaded. "We were about to lose the house. So instead of being honest, instead of asking for help, you decided to sacrifice my education?" The hurt in my voice was unmistakable. "We convinced ourselves it was still for your benefit," my father said quietly. "That keeping a roof over your head, maintaining the family stability, was more important than how the money was originally intended to be used. Then why keep up the pretense that I was still in school?" I demanded. "Why not just be honest when I told you I was dropping out?" My parents exchanged another of those glances that now seemed so suspicious to me. Because of me, Grandma Eleanor interjected. They were afraid I would discover what they had done if they admitted you had left school. And because we were ashamed, my mother admitted, tears streaming down her face. We couldn't face what we had done, so we created this fiction that everything was fine, that you were still in school. Then when you said you were dropping out to work, to help us financially. Her voice broke. You let me believe I was helping the family, I said, the full weight of their deception hitting me anew. You let me work 2 jobs, live in a terrible apartment, skip meals to make rent, all while you were still taking money from my trust fund. By then, we were using the money for Kevin's education too, my father admitted. We had told ourselves that once he graduated and got a job, we would make things right with you. Kevin pushed back from the table abruptly. So my degree is being paid for with Allison's money? Money that was specifically designated for her education. Not all of it, my father hastened to add. Your scholarship covers a significant portion, and your trust is intact. We've just supplemented when necessary. With my money, I said flatly. Yes, my father admitted, hanging his head. With your money. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked around the table at my family, seeing them all with new eyes. My father, not the successful professional I'd always believed him to be, but a man crushed by financial pressure who had made a devastating moral compromise. My mother, not the put-together homemaker, but a woman with a serious addiction she'd hidden from everyone. My brother, not simply the favored child, but an unwitting beneficiary of my loss. And me, not the dropout who had sacrificed for her family, but the victim of a betrayal so profound it had altered the course of my life. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I said finally, the words hanging in the air like icicles. You didn't just take money from me. You took my choice, my agency, my trust. We know, my mother whispered. And we will spend the rest of our lives trying to make it right if you'll let us. How? I challenged. How could you possibly make this right? First, my father said, straightening in his chair, by repaying every cent we took, with interest. It will take time. But we'll do it. We'll sell the house, my mother added. It's too big for us anyway, with both of you gone. We can downsize, use the equity to start repaying the trust. And I'll contribute too, Kevin said firmly. Once I start working, I'll put a percentage of every paycheck toward paying you back. This isn't your debt to repay, I told him. Maybe not legally, he acknowledged, but morally? Part of my education was funded by your trust. I benefited from what they did, even if I didn't know it. Grandma Eleanor nodded approvingly. Taking responsibility is the first step. But there's more work to be done here than just financial restitution. Trust has been broken. That's not repaired with money alone. What are you suggesting? My father asked. Family counseling, for a start, she said decisively. And complete financial transparency moving forward. No more secrets. No more separate accounts hidden from each other. She turned to my mother. And you need professional help for your addiction, Margaret. Real help, not just promises to do better. My mother nodded, wiping her tears. I know. I've known for a long time, but I've been too ashamed to admit it. And what about me? I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. What am I supposed to do now? Go back to my 2 jobs and pretend this never happened? No, Grandma Eleanor said firmly. You have options now, Allison. The remaining money in your trust is still substantial. You could return to school if you want. Or use it to start a business, or travel, or whatever you decide is best for your future. The point is, it's your choice now. No one else's. The weight of that choice settled over me. After 2 years of just trying to survive, the prospect of having options again was almost overwhelming. I need time, I said finally. Time to think, to process all of this. I can't make any decisions tonight. Of course, my father said quickly. Take all the time you need. We're not going anywhere. But as I looked at him, at all of them, I realized that wasn't true. Everything had gone somewhere, had shifted irreversibly. The family I thought I had was gone, replaced by this group of flawed, desperate people who had made terrible choices. The question now was whether, from the ashes of those choices, something new could be built. Something honest. Something real. Something worth saving. Christmas morning dawned cold and clear, sunlight reflecting blindingly off the snow-covered yard. I had spent the night in my childhood bedroom, though sleep had been elusive. The familiar space felt alien now, the cheerful yellow walls and academic trophies from high school like artifacts from someone else's life. The house was unnaturally quiet for Christmas Day. No excited chatter, no Christmas music playing on the stereo, no scent of cinnamon rolls baking in the oven, as was our family tradition. Just heavy silence, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I pulled on a sweater and padded down the hallway in my socks. The Christmas tree lights were on, casting a multicolored glow over the presents still arranged beneath it, but no one was in the living room. From the kitchen, I heard the soft clink of a spoon against a mug. Grandma Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. She looked up as I entered, offering a tired smile. "Merry Christmas, such as it is," she said. "There's coffee in the pot if you want some." I poured myself a cup and joined her at the table. "Where is everyone?" "Your mother is still in bed. She took a sleeping pill last night, probably still out cold. Your father went for a walk about an hour ago. Said he needed to clear his head. Kevin is in the shower, I believe." I nodded, sipping the strong black coffee. "Have you been up long?" "Most of the night, if I'm honest," she admitted. Too many thoughts spinning around this old head of mine. Too many questions about where we go from here. "I've been thinking the same thing," I said. "Part of me wants to just pack up and leave, go back to my apartment, and try to forget any of this happened." "You could do that," Grandma acknowledged. "No one would blame you. But I don't think it would bring you peace." She was right, of course. Running away wouldn't erase what had happened. The betrayal would follow me, coloring every relationship, every interaction, every attempt to trust again. "I don't know how to forgive them," I admitted. "I don't even know if I should." "Forgiveness isn't something you owe anyone," Grandma said thoughtfully. "It's a gift you give yourself, when and if you're ready. And it doesn't mean you forget or that there aren't consequences." The back door opened, and my father stepped in, bringing a rush of cold air with him. His cheeks were red from the cold, his eyes red-rimmed from what might have been the wind or might have been tears. He stopped short when he saw us at the table. "I can come back later," he offered. "No," I said, surprising myself. "You should join us." He hung his coat on the hook by the door and cautiously took a seat at the table, maintaining a careful distance from me. "I've been walking around the neighborhood," he said, his voice rough, "thinking about all the ways I've failed as a father, as a husband, as a son." He glanced at his mother, then back to me. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I'm going to do everything in my power to make amends, however inadequate that might be." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. We all looked at each other in confusion. "Are we expecting someone?" I asked. My father shook his head. "Not that I know of." Grandma Eleanor rose from her chair. "I'll get it. Might as well make myself useful." She returned a moment later with a thick manila envelope in her hands. "Courier delivery," she explained. "For you, Allison." I took the envelope, noting the law firm's name embossed in the corner. "What is this?" "Open it and find out," Grandma said, resuming her seat. Inside the envelope were several legal documents, the language dense and formal. As I skimmed the pages, certain phrases jumped out at me. Transfer of trusteeship, immediate access, irrevocable designation of funds. "I called my lawyer last night," Grandma explained as I looked up in confusion. "Had him draw up the paperwork to remove your parents as trustees and transfer control of what remains in your educational trust directly to you. He was not pleased about working on Christmas Eve, but I can be very persuasive when necessary. You did this for me." I asked, genuinely touched by her swift action. I should have been more vigilant from the beginning, she said, a flash of self-recrimination crossing her face. This is the least I could do to begin setting things right. My father stared at the documents, then nodded slowly. It's the right thing to do. He agreed. We forfeited any right to oversee that money the moment we misused it. I've also included documentation of exactly how much was withdrawn over the years, Grandma continued. My lawyer will be drawing up a repayment agreement for your parents to sign, with a schedule of monthly payments and interest. This is really happening, I said. The reality of the situation finally sinking in. I have control over my own money. I can make my own choices. Yes, Grandma said firmly. Your life is your own again. The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced Kevin's arrival. He paused in the doorway, taking in the scene before him. What's going on? He asked. Grandma's making sure I get what's left of my trust fund, I explained, holding up the documents. Kevin nodded. Good. That's good. He entered the kitchen fully, pouring himself a cup of coffee before turning to face me. I've been doing some calculations. Based on my job offer and if I live very frugally, I can contribute about $800 a month toward paying you back. It's not much compared to what was taken, but it's a start. Kevin, you don't have to do that, I began. Yes, I do. He interrupted firmly. My education came at your expense. That's not right, and I need to make it right. Another set of footsteps, slower and hesitant, heralded my mother's appearance. She looked haggard, her eyes swollen from crying, her hair uncombed. I heard voices, she said softly. Merry Christmas, everyone. No one responded to the holiday greeting. It seemed absurd under the circumstances, like saying congratulations at a funeral. I've been thinking, my mother continued, wringing her hands nervously, about what Grandma Eleanor said last night about getting help. I found a therapist who specializes in compulsive spending and addiction. She can't see me until after the new year, but I made an appointment. That's a positive step, Grandma acknowledged. And what about the two of you together? She looked pointedly between my parents. Financial infidelity is still infidelity. It's broken your marriage as surely as it's broken your family. My parents exchanged a glance. A different kind than the conspiratorial looks I'd noticed yesterday. This was more open, more vulnerable. We've talked about marriage counseling too, my father said. We both want to try to save our relationship, if that's possible. And we understand if you need distance from us, Allison, my mother added quickly. We won't pressure you to forgive us or to maintain a relationship if that's not what you want. The sincerity in her voice caught me off guard. For the first time since the revelations of the previous night, I felt a tiny crack in the wall of anger I'd built around myself. I don't know what I want yet, I admitted. I'm still processing everything, but I do know I don't want to make any hasty decisions I might regret later. That's wise, Grandma approved. Healing takes time. Trust takes even longer to rebuild, if it can be rebuilt at all. So what do we do now? Kevin asked, looking around at our fractured family gathered in the kitchen on Christmas morning. Just go on as if everything is normal? Open presents and pretend we're fine. No, I said definitively. No more pretending. That's what got us here in the first place. I took a deep breath, making a decision I hadn't known I was ready to make. I think we need to start with honesty. Complete, unflinching honesty. Even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. What does that look like? My father asked cautiously. It means I tell you how betrayed I feel, I said, meeting his eyes directly. How angry I am that you let me work myself to exhaustion while you continued to take money that was meant for me. How humiliated I feel when I think about all the lies I told friends and coworkers about still being in school because I was too ashamed to admit I'd dropped out. My parents flinched but didn't look away. It means I tell you, I continued, turning to my mother, that I'm furious you chose material things over my education. That every time you complimented my thrift store clothes or my bargain hunting skills, knowing I was struggling while you were hiding shopping bags in your closet. You were twisting the knife a little deeper. She nodded, tears streaming down her face again. And it means I tell you, I said to Kevin, that even though I know it's not rational. Part of me resents that you got to stay in school, that you're about to graduate and start your career while I'm still making lattes and mixing drinks. That it hurts every time someone asks what my little brother is up to and I have to hear about your success. I understand, he said quietly. I would feel the same way. But it also means, I continued, my voice softening slightly, that I acknowledge you're all trying to make amends in your own ways. That I see that you're owning your mistakes and taking steps to address them. That matters, even if it doesn't fix everything overnight. For the first time since the previous night's revelations, I saw a glimmer of hope in my parents' eyes. Not expectation, not demand, but the tiniest spark of possibility that someday, somehow, we might find a way forward together. So where does that leave us? My father asked. At the beginning, I said simply. Day one of whatever comes next. 6 months after that fateful Christmas dinner, I stood outside the administration building of Merrimack College, my heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and excitement. The summer sun warmed my face as I clutched my acceptance letter and financial aid package, ready to finally restart the education that had been so abruptly interrupted. With the remaining money from my trust fund and a modest scholarship, I had enough to complete a degree in psychology at this smaller, more affordable school. It wouldn't be Boston University, but it would be mine, earned honestly and completely under my control. My phone buzzed with a text from Kevin. Good luck today, sis. Call me after and tell me how it goes. Our relationship had been one of the first to begin healing in the aftermath of Christmas. Initially awkward and strained, we had gradually found our way back to each other through weekly coffee dates where we talked openly about our feelings, our parents, and our hopes for the future. He had kept his promise, sending me money each month from his new job, despite my continued insistence that it wasn't necessary. My parents were a more complicated story. True to their word. They had sold the family home, moving into a small condo and using the equity to begin repaying my trust. My mother was 6 months into therapy for her shopping addiction, attending weekly sessions and a support group. My father had found a better-paying job through one of Grandma Eleanor's connections, though his pride had made him reluctant to accept the help at first. We were still feeling our way forward, our relationships fragile but no longer shattered beyond recognition. The monthly family counseling sessions that Grandma had insisted upon were awkward and often painful, but they provided a structured space for us to continue the honest conversations we had begun on Christmas morning. As I walked into the administration building to finalize my enrollment, I thought about how much had changed in those 6 months. Not just the practical circumstances of my life, though those were significant. I had quit my exhausting dual jobs, finding part-time work as a research assistant that would complement my studies. I had moved from my dismal studio to a modest but comfortable apartment shared with a fellow student. But the deeper changes were internal. I had learned painful lessons about trust, about family, about the complicated nature of love and forgiveness. I had discovered strengths in myself I never knew existed, a resilience forged in the fire of betrayal and its aftermath. The enrollment process took less than an hour. As I walked back to my car with my student ID and course schedule, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. This was my choice, my path. Funded by money that was rightfully mine and supplemented by my own hard work. I drove to Grandma Eleanor's house, where she was expecting me for lunch. Her role in my life had expanded significantly since Christmas, becoming not just a grandmother but a mentor, advocate, and sometimes a necessary buffer between me and my parents. There she is, she called from the porch as I pulled into her driveway. The college woman returns. I hugged her tightly, breathing in her familiar scent of Chanel No. 5 and peppermint. All official. I confirmed. Classes start in 3 weeks. I'm so proud of you, she said, leading me inside to her kitchen where lunch was already laid out. Not just for going back to school, but for everything. The way you've handled yourself through all of this shows remarkable strength of character. I've had a good example, I said, squeezing her hand. Over lunch, I filled her in on the details of my enrollment, the courses I would be taking, the professors I had met. She listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions and offering advice only when asked. Your parents called this morning, she mentioned as we cleared the dishes. They wanted to know how your enrollment went. I'll call them later, I promised. Our communication was still somewhat formal, scheduled rather than spontaneous, but it was communication nonetheless. They're trying, Allison, Grandma said gently, in their own imperfect way. I know they are, I acknowledged. And I'm trying too. It's just, there are still moments when the anger comes rushing back, when I remember everything I lost because of their choices. That's natural, she assured me. Healing isn't linear. It's 2 steps forward and 1 step back, sometimes 3 steps back. The important thing is that you keep moving, keep processing, keep being honest about where you are. Later that evening, as I sat on my small balcony watching the sunset, I called my parents as promised. The conversation was stilted at first, as our conversations often still were, but as I described my course schedule and the campus, a genuine enthusiasm crept into my voice that seemed to bridge some of the distance between us. We're so happy for you, Allison, my mother said. This is what should have happened 2 years ago. Mom, my father cautioned in the background, ever sensitive to statements that might trigger resentment. No, it's okay, I said. She's right. This should have happened 2 years ago. But it's happening now, and that's what matters. We received the trust statement, my father said, changing the subject slightly. The repayment went through for this month. Thank you, I said. The words still feeling strange in this context. Should I be thanking them for returning what was rightfully mine? But I recognized the effort it represented, the sacrifices they were making to try to make amends. Will you come for dinner sometime next week? My mother asked hesitantly. Before your classes start? I promise not to make it a big deal. I hesitated only briefly. Yes, I'd like that. Maybe Thursday? The relief in her voice was palpable. Thursday would be perfect. Just the 3 of us. After we hung up, I sat watching the last colors of sunset fade from the sky, reflecting on the journey of the past 6 months. The family I had now was not the perfect, polished image I had grown up believing in. It was messy, complicated, scarred by betrayal and dishonesty. But it was real in a way it had never been before. The love, though damaged, had proven more resilient than I might have expected on that awful Christmas night. The following December, we gathered again for Christmas dinner. Not in the family home, which now belonged to a young couple with twins, but in my parents' condo, the space modest but warm. Grandma Eleanor sat at one end of the table, resplendent in a red sweater with a holiday brooch. Kevin brought his new girlfriend, a quiet, thoughtful woman who fit seamlessly into our still-healing family dynamic. As we passed dishes around the table, the conversation flowing more naturally than it had in months, I caught Grandma's eye across the table. She gave me a small, knowing smile, an acknowledgement of how far we had come and how far we still had to go. When the meal was finished, my father cleared his throat. I have something I'd like to say. He reached for my mother's hand before continuing. This past year has been the hardest of our lives in many ways. We've had to face painful truths about ourselves, about the choices we made, about the harm we caused to the people we love most. My mother nodded, squeezing his hand. But it's also been a year of growth, of learning, of trying to become better people than we were before. We know that words are just words, my father continued. That trust is rebuilt through actions, consistency, and time. We're grateful for the patience you've shown us, Allison, for the chance to try to make things right. And we're proud of you, my mother added, her eyes shining with tears. So proud of how you've reclaimed your education, your independence, your future. I felt my own eyes growing damp. Thank you, I said simply, for doing the work, for not giving up. On yourselves or on us. Later, as we sat in the living room with cups of hot chocolate, the Christmas tree twinkling in the corner, I reflected on the lesson that had emerged from our family's painful unraveling and gradual reweaving. The truth, no matter how difficult, is always better than the most comforting lie. Secrets and deception may seem like protection, like a way to avoid pain or preserve what matters, but they inevitably cause far greater damage than the honesty they're designed to avoid. True love, true family, can only exist in the light of truth, however harsh that light might sometimes be. Looking around at my imperfect, struggling, but fundamentally resilient family, I knew that the journey wasn't over. There would be more difficult conversations, more moments of doubt, more painful memories to process. But for the first time in years, I felt confident that we were moving in the right direction, that the foundation we were building now, brick by painful brick, was stronger and more authentic than the facade we had maintained before. "What are you thinking about?" Kevin asked, noticing my contemplative expression. "Just about how sometimes the things that seem like they're breaking us are actually remaking us," I said. "How the most painful revelations can lead to the most necessary growth." Grandma Eleanor raised her mug in a small toast. "To truth," she said simply. "However difficult, however painful, may we always have the courage to face it." "To truth," we echoed, our voices joining in a promise to ourselves and to each other. If you've ever experienced a betrayal that eventually led to healing and growth, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Has a painful truth ever changed your family forever? Remember to like this video if my story resonated with you, subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and redemption, and share with someone who might need to be reminded that even the deepest wounds can eventually become pathways to strength. Thank you for listening, and remember, the truth may hurt for a little while, but lies hurt forever.